Welcome back to Grow and Glow with Miss Alex, yours truly, La Mera Mera Petatera, per my mom. This is part 3 of therapy, episode 5. We're going to go ahead and just wrap up my journey with therapy, how things are going today. There's going to be a little bit of a story time and then some very important material that I'm going to go over. So make sure you stick around. Welcome back again to Grow and Glow. We are going to go ahead and get started. As you can tell, we are in my living room because I did not finish cleaning my closet. Yes, I am a flake. Just kidding. It just started raining, so I just didn't finish. So hopefully I will finish soon. But today we're actually going to talk about the current state in which I'm in. After about 4 years, I'm still in therapy. I'll probably be in therapy for a really long time. And that is very much by choice. No one's forcing me to go to therapy. It really just is something that has helped me work through my trauma. Having that said, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an update as to what's going on in my life right now. As you may know, I started this podcast a couple of months ago, or actually, I started about a month ago, but I had been planning to start it officially a couple months ago. This is something that I had wanted to do for years. And the reason for why I really decided to pull the trigger was because I actually became unemployed a couple months ago. And it was because of my legal status in this country. It wasn't something that I chose for myself. That kind of put me in a very stressful place where I had to figure things out very quickly, which I did. And thankfully, it looks like I don't want to sing glory too soon, but it looks like I'm going to be employed within the next month, hopefully. And coming out of this on the other side, I've realized how much of a badass I am because I never thought I would start my own podcast. I thought it was really a little bit of a delusional thought for a long time. And to have made the decision to really start it was very brave of me. That's my cat. That's a Güero. It's my first cat that I ever got. Even though I feel brave for doing it, it really re-triggered a lot of my toxic tendencies. I have to admit that after being unemployed for a couple months, I am still struggling with a little bit of depression. I have a hard time getting out of bed sometimes. And although I still struggle with my anxiety and stress, what I always try to fall back on is the resources and tools that I have around me. Ever since I started to realize that I was struggling with my mental health again because of my circumstance, it almost kind of wraps things up for me in a perfect little bow, because where I left off last time was when I became very destructive within my family dynamic. If you haven't listened to my prior episode, I do recommend you go do that. But what I basically happened is that I became very destructive with my family at a party, at an event, and I was heavily intoxicated. So, what actually happened afterward was that I spoke with my therapist and I said, hey, I acted a fool at a gathering because I was heavily intoxicated. She said, hey, have you ever considered going to a group that specifically talks about substance abuse? And I was like, no, I'm not going to that. I don't I don't have a problem. But in reality, I did very much have a problem. That's actually the reason for why this final episode is so important, is because I'm going to go ahead and talk about what I learned when I tapped into accepting that I had an issue with alcohol. After several months of her asking me, I realized maybe I should give it a chance. And so I went, and so I signed up. And upon signing up, I spoke with the therapist who was going to guide the group during our one-on-one, and she sent me the package that we were going to work through. And I have the package in front of me, and it says, what is PTSD? And the reason for why That is so important. Maybe it was just my generation of Hispanics. I'm the first to raise my hand and say, "Hi, I'm the drunk Thea. And I'm here because I drink too much." And the reason I say that is because there's a lot of my peers, a lot of people that I grew up with and that I know that struggle with alcohol abuse now or struggle with substance abuse. I want to bring light to this matter. And what I mean by that is that I want to really open up the door of the conversation to really ask ourselves and ask each other, why is it that we're struggling with alcoholism or substance abuse? We don't realize how closely correlated, how codependent, how deep the relationship is between your abuse and the trauma that you went through as a child and your toxic tendencies now, specifically substance abuse. So that's really what this is going to be about. I've never been a huge fan of being diagnosed when it comes to mental health. I don't believe that I'm officially diagnosed. Maybe I am. What I can tell you is that I probably do have PTSD. And PTSD is actually divided into two different subcategories. There is simple PTSD, and then there is complex PTSD. So I'm going to go ahead and just read the definition of both. Okay, so simple PTSD is from a single incident, such as a car crash, usually as an adult. And so I've actually worked in the insurance field for a long time. And so a lot of people would talk to me about how they felt after an accident and how scary it is to drive after an accident. That fear is very real. That's simple PTSD, but still a very realistic fear that people have. Complex PTSD is the following. Complex PTSD is from repeated incidents such as domestic violence or ongoing child abuse. It has a broad range of symptoms, including problems with self-harm, suicide, dissociation, loss of time, relationships, memory, sexuality, health, anger, shame, guilt, numbness, loss of faith and trust, and feeling damaged. That was revelating for me to read that for the first time. And right now, as I read it to you, I highlighted 80% of the symptoms that I outlined. And the reason for why I highlighted them is because as an adult, especially speaking to a mental health professional, sometimes I would tell her, what if I just made all of this up? What if, as a child, everything that I think I went through, I just made up in my head? And it was funny because my therapist is very compassionate and understanding, and she would say it in such a beautiful way, but she would basically tell me, "Girl, your textbook." Now I laugh, but it wasn't funny. Like, to realize that I literally the textbook version of PTSD, complex PTSD. The one that I specifically underlined was feeling damaged. It was almost validating. I realized that no, I didn't make anything up in my head. All of these things did in fact happen. And yes, it's sad, but also I understood why I am who I am today. Now I can own to the fact that yes, I was in fact very much impacted and affected by the abuse that I witnessed as a child. And no one can sit here and invalidate my experience. To the surprise of many, or maybe no one is surprised, there are still adults in my life today who try to invalidate my experience. They try to act like the fact that they harmed my parent physically in front of me is completely irrelevant now. It actually is very relevant. It's the reason for why I can't trust people. It's the reason for why, if I feel like you are someone who is capable of allowing someone to attack my loved one, then I cannot trust you and I get defensive. And now I'm coming for you. I'm coming. It's blood. Like, I want blood. And I realize that it's not healthy for me to do that to myself. It was very validating to read about what PTSD was. The next part of it is that I really want to talk about the close, toxic codependency relationship that PTSD and substance abuse have. So, this is where things get really interesting because I did not realize how close these two were until I had to sit down and learn about them. I'm not going to go over the entire packet because fuck that. It's a lot. But one thing I can tell you is that when it comes to PTSD and substance abuse, there are a lot of common factors. And so one of them that these two have, this is a theme within these two, is the idea of secrecy. Secrecy means when you may feel ashamed and wish to keep your problems a secret. For example, the traumas you experience, the amount of your substance abuse. Control refers to the idea that with trauma and substance abuse, you feel out of control. In PTSD, a terrible event occurred that you neither chose nor wanted. In substance abuse, you have lost control over your ability to stop using. Learning the skills of honesty and regaining control are thus important for healing. And I think that's like probably the most direct way of saying if you're a liar, it's probably because of your trauma. And if you accept people who are constantly lying to you, it's probably because of your trauma. And everyone who drinks around me, we will never be honest about how often or how much we drink. And that within itself is us being in denial and lying to ourselves. That is really the root and cause of the issues in my family dynamic. I also see it in a lot of other people. I have a lot of friends, a lot of peers who either are alcoholics themselves or have family members who are alcoholics as well. This is really a pandemic within our culture as Hispanic, and I'm sure it's within the BIPOC culture itself as well. Having understood what PTSD was and how I was abusing alcohol and other recreational drugs from a place where I was refusing to work on myself and heal and work through my trauma, when I realized my problem, the first thing that I asked is, how do I fix it? How do I resolve it? Does this stop? This is where things get interesting. Let me get comfortable really quick. So how do we stop this? How, as a community, people of color, how do we end this? How do we start to move that scale so that we can heal and we can help others start to heal? I think that's really the most compelling question of them all. And the answer is pretty easy, actually. It almost feels like it's so easy that it won't work. The antidote to this issue is really having compassion. Compassion is huge. So I'm going to go ahead and read what it says on compassion because it literally says using compassion to take your power back. Having compassion for your PTSD and substance abuse is a way to take back your power. One of the most troubling aspects of PTSD and substance abuse is that you feel powerless over them. They are controlling you rather than you controlling them. Compassion means accepting and respecting yourself. The opposite of compassion is harshness. Rather than blaming yourself, the goal is to understand and really listen to yourself at a deeper level. Compassion may feel difficult to do. It is easier to beat yourself up and hate yourself, especially if you grew up in a family where this is how you were treated. With PTSD and substance abuse, you may view yourself as sick, damaged, weak, crazy, bad, or lazy. There may be people in your life who view you in those ways too. However, it is helpful to understand your PTSD and substance abuse as attempts to survive and cope. It has been said that these symptoms simultaneously conceal and reveal their origins. They speak in disguised language of secrets too terrible for words. I think that's the part that sucks. Under the concept of using alcohol and drugs to numb ourselves, we would rather use alcohol and drugs to avoid how we treat ourselves because we probably beat ourselves up all the time. Really allowing yourself to intentionally have compassion for yourself on a regular basis, to try to practice compassion for yourself, you already start a little bit of a circle. That circle is defined by a safe space. When you decide every day, I'm not going to beat myself up, I'm going to have compassion for myself instead, you create that safe space for yourself. And the more you do it and the more often you do it, that space only broadens. And when it starts to broaden, you start to realize that you can have compassion for somebody else and you can hold a safe space for somebody else. And that essentially to me is how we all start to heal ourselves and how we all start to help each other to heal. This next part is actually I'm going to talk about romantic relationships. Um, I had a single mom my whole life. And because of that, I witnessed a lot of her toxic, unhealthy relationships. And not only did I witness those relationships, I felt them as well. I felt her pain all the time. And as an adult, not even as an adult, as a teenager, I started to have unhealthy relationships as well. I've had unhealthy romantic relationships my whole life. And so this is probably what I want to give people, especially women, especially Hispanic women, especially women of color. It wasn't until I started to work on myself that I realized that most of the relationships I was in were, in fact, abusive relationships. And this next exercise is what helped me realize that. I thought I was only in one, maybe two abusive relationships until I realized that emotional, mental, financial, verbal abuse, those are also abuse. It's also abuse, and there's no excuse for that. So that's really what I hope that people, women of color, take from this. If you know me, I've ever shared a space with you, and I have talked in particular about therapy, I want you to know that there is light on the other side of that tunnel. It's just not gonna look like how everybody puts it. Like, I don't live this life full of light and amazing. No, I still struggle. The only difference is that I'm no longer willing to accept certain people into my life. I'm no longer willing to accept certain behavior. And it comes from a place where I know how destructive and damaging it could be to accept that behavior from people. We're going to do a little bit of an exercise. And so this exercise is going to ask the following. It says, are you in a relationship right now in which someone does the following? And you could either answer yes or no. So the first one, are you in a relationship with someone who offers you substances or uses substances in your presence after you've asked this person not to? I've been in a relationship where someone did that. And yes, that was an abusive relationship. Number two, are you in a relationship right now with someone who repeatedly criticizes you, invalidates your feelings, or humiliates you? Yes, I've been in a relationship where someone has humiliated me and said some of the worst things that I could ever even think of. And I remember that guy, he was not very great, and he he talked about like my fertility, and he said just something that I will never forget. Are you in a relationship with someone who manipulates you? For example, threatens to harm your children. And I think that is where I will probably create another episode to really speak on what it means to manipulate or be manipulated by someone. But yes, if you feel like someone is threatening you or your children, that's abusive. Number four, are you with someone who is physically hurting you or threatening to hurt you? I think that's a big one. That's a big one because I have never been actually assaulted by someone. I have been in a situation where someone threatened to assault me. And when I spoke to them and I said the next day, I said, I know you were intoxicated, but you did this and you said this. They said, well, I don't remember, so it didn't happen. And again, that's manipulative. That's someone gaslighting you. The other one says, are you in a relationship with someone who discourages you from getting help? For example, going to therapy. And that's a big one for me. I have I haven't really been with someone who's told me don't go to therapy, but I have experienced my friends saying, "Hey, I told my partner that I was gonna journal or that I was gonna journal, and they wanted to read what was in my journal, and I had to tell them, hey, that's abuse. That's abusive. No one should be reading your journals, not if you don't want them to." And so I really had to sit there and explain to them that that behavior from their partner just wasn't okay. Okay, the other one. It says someone who lies to you repeatedly. And that is a big one. Just because lies, they're it's like a dark room. If you lie and lie and lie and lie, you just create a really dark room for yourself. And if you do it to somebody else, you put them in that dark room with you. The next one, someone who betrays your trust. For example, tells your secret to others. And I think that's really important. If you're in a relationship with someone and this person is constantly going to third parties to discuss their relationship with you and allowing other people to have judgment over your relationship, that is pretty abusive. That's probably the most common abuse that I see that people allow. I have a relationship really close to me where the male figure is constantly going to their family, victimizing themselves, and the family, they think it's appropriate to bully the female in the relationship, and it's difficult to watch because I don't think that as a family, including this male, I don't think that they realize the level of their abuse. And so it's unfortunate, but yes, it happens. Someone who exploits you and sells pornographic pictures of you. This is probably one that is, again, pretty common. So if you're with someone and you guys are sexually intimate and you both have pictures and videos and they decide to share them or show them to somebody else, that's abuse. In the state of Oregon, I think that you could actually sue someone for that. Ignores your physical needs. I think that's really important. And the example that it gives is refuses to have safe sex. So if you're telling someone, hey, we need to protect ourselves, we need to be safe in having sex, and your partner is like dismissive of it, that's abuse. Another one that goes a little bit deeper, this is speaking to women, is when we withhold sex to manipulate someone. And I didn't realize how harmful or hurtful that was until one of my friends again was telling me, like, hey, I'm in this relationship and this person does this to me. And I was like, you're being manipulated with sex. You're being told by this person, yes, we're in a sexual relationship, and then the next day you're not. And that's pretty abusive. The last one is controlling or overly involved. An example tells you what to do. So if you're in a relationship where you feel like you have no right over your life, that is abusive. If you feel like you cannot get up and go do whatever the heck you want, that's abusive. I know that's like difficult because some of us want to go and be reckless, and our loved one is like, no, I'm not going to let you go and be reckless. And even within that circumstance, if you have a partner who wants to go and be reckless, there's only so much that you can do before you have to accept them as they are and let them be or not. I really wanted to go over that because a lot of us, especially again in our culture, we only see abuse as one-sided. We think that abuse means, oh, the person is hitting us and that's abusive. But we don't see that abuse itself has many different shapes and forms and sizes and colors. It's not just someone hitting you. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up with the following. This is probably the most important part of this. This is what people should take other than having compassion for yourself. It is important to know that you can heal from PTSD and substance abuse. Many people do. It does not mean that you forget about your past. Rather, it means that it is no longer holding such destructive power over your life. And I think that was like the most important part of me to learn is that now that my life is very different than what it was, let's say 3, 4 years ago, I still practice some toxic tendencies, but I know that it is because there's a deeper level of pain and hurt within me that I have to acknowledge. And that is probably the best part. I welcome now all of the lessons. I welcome the mistakes that I make in my life. I welcome the very slow and progressive journey that life has for me because I know that it's never going to be perfect. And that's one thing I want to say is that although I do love TikTok and Instagram, I do feel like healing and self work is a little glamorized or romanticized on social media. Trust me that it doesn't look like the way Instagram and TikTok show it all the time. It can. Certain aspects of it are great. You can only do so much meditation, and you can only before you realize it's not really going to work if I don't work on what's under that. That was very important for me is to realize, okay, if I'm getting out of bed past 10 a.m. every day, it's not because I'm lazy. It's because I need rest. It's either because my body needs to rest, or I need to be inspired to get out of bed, and I can work with that. I can ask myself, what inspires me to get out of bed every day? And I can start to work on that from there. So, yeah, it's not easy. It's not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily fun all the time, but it's worth it because I know that the way I treat myself now is very different than how I treated myself 4 or 5 years ago. I hope it helped. Again, this is for the collective, for whoever understands it, understands it. If you don't, that's okay. I hope you come back because this is when we're going to start having fun. I'm going to start having guests. I'm going to start just having a lot of fun with this. Again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing this space with me. I really appreciate you watching this till the end. And until next time, bye.